Welcome back to Arizona Gearheads. As I promised in the introduction, I'm going to show you how to get the front suspension off, rebuilt, and replaced on my 1955 Ford Fairlane. One of the things that I did, it's not essential to do this, but it will certainly make your job much easier, is I removed all of the front sheet metal from the car. When you do this, when I did it, I hadn't done this before, so I kind of fumbled around and removed bolts. But the easy way to do this is remove the outer fender first. That will leave the fender liner inside, then remove the bolts from the fender liner. What you must have to do this is you must have an angle grinder. Although this is a pretty rust-free car, there were only 4 bolts that I had to cut off in this. In my 52 Merc that I did, I had to cut nearly every bolt off in order to get the front end off. So if you have an angle grinder, it really makes it a lot easier. And before I give you a walk around here, I want to talk just briefly about tools, because these are things that you really need in order to get this job done correctly. First, I mentioned before, the angle grinder. These are available just about anywhere. You want to make sure you use a cutoff wheel. You can get them at Harbor Freight for a few dollars, and it is essential to getting the difficult parts removed from the car. Number 2. Here we have your basic impact driver. The impact driver will take the nuts and bolts out of your front end as you take this sheet metal off in a jiffy. And it will also help you to disassemble the front suspension when you take it off. There are parts of the suspension putting it back on that I do not recommend using this. But for removal, it will cut your time probably by 80% in removing the nuts and bolts. Number 3. Everyone in their toolbox should have one of these. This is a pair of vice grips. Because on the bolts that we cut off, the J-bolts inside the fender were stripped. So we would have to go up inside the fender, clip this onto that J-bolt, and then back the nut back out. So this is a very important tool for you. And these 2 tools right here, this is really important. This is a pickle fork. This is used to bust off, for lack of a better way to put it, the ball joints. And this is the all-purpose sledgehammer. If this doesn't knock the ball joints loose, then your sledgehammer is too small, and you'll need a bigger sledgehammer. And I will film later on about how hard you have to hit these to knock them loose. So this goes in there, and you really need to pound it in order to break these ball joints loose. The last item that I think is essential for you, and you can use whatever brand you want, but this is PB Blaster, which is, I soaked every nut and bolt in this front end in this. If you don't do it, plan on using your angle grinder a lot, because this will really get the job done. With that said, gearheads, let's take a look at what the challenge is. We've got the front end off. You'll be able to see it pretty well. I've already started on this side, so I'll just do a quick walk around and give you an overview of what we're going to do, and then I will continue later on as I disassemble the entire front end in the car. This is the passenger side front suspension. You know, we have a spindle down here. Mine are going to be replaced. I'm putting Granada spindles on it. A couple of ball joints, just the normal suspension pieces. This has been sort of semi-cleaned. Although it may look pretty dirty to you, you're going to have to dig in here in order to really get down to the nuts and bolts of replacing this. Everything else has been soaked in PB Blaster, and all the nuts are pretty loose, so I'll be able to get this side off very quickly. Going around to the other unmolested side, this is what it looks like. It is not pretty. There are nuts and bolts underneath here, but they're underneath this thick layer of grease. Also, your upper ball joint, although you can't see it, is right here under this enormous, oh, there we go, this enormous lump of stuff. Same way on the lowers, your steering arm, it's quite a bit of gunk, and you're going to have to scrape that off to get to the bolts. The brake itself, there are just 4 bolts in it, and that whole thing will come off. Well, we're back, gearheads, and let's get this suspension taken apart. The first thing that I took off was the steering ball joint, which is this piece connected onto the steering arm, which is down here behind your brake. It's easy to get that off. It's the first one we get off, and then we have control of the spindle to get the brake drum off. So it made it much easier. The next thing I'm going to take off is I'm going to take the shock out. And the reason that I'm going to do that is if I don't take it out now, and I lower the A-arm, I won't be able to get it out. There she comes. I've already loosened this ball joint. This one is still tight, so I'm going to take off the anti-sway bar right now, and that'll give us a little bit more room to work with, and it'll also let us release that A-arm. There we have our sway bar free. So we're going to use our pickle fork. We're going to find a nice spot in here somewhere that we want to hit this, and I would think about right there would be a good spot. Of course, what you always think isn't always correct. Not quite. He's getting closer. I'm going to have to release this a little bit. Allow this to drop. There she is. You can see how hard you have to hit this thing. Now we're going to let this jack down a little bit. Carefully. Now let's see if we can get the spring out there. Sometimes there's little, there she is. One spring. And here's your spindle. This is the original Ford, and I'm going to replace this with a Granada spindle. So I won't be reusing this piece, but I will save this spindle nut in case I need it.